All that glitters is blessed gold. One Page Rules has decided to let soar some angels in the form of Jetpack sisters from the Blessed Sisters. And no, that's not me misspeaking, they are now called Blessed Sisters. I have to bestow my painting blessings on them with some of the holiest metal, gold. But instead of going non-metal metal, I want to get the metallics out and give this one in particular some real shine. And since I've done a more in-depth video on how to get some really snazzy metallics with help from normal pigments, which you can find a link to below, I'm going to make this one a bit more simple, using a contrast paint to get some contrast, but otherwise it's just going to be the metals themselves. And to focus on the metal, I'm just going to get the rest of this stuff out of the way right now. Some light gray paints and leather straps. The rest will all be metal. The thing about metallic golds is there isn't just one gold. So I'm going to swatch mine out just to help me figure out what I want to be using for what. The metallics I like to use are the scale 75 ones. I have about 7 here that look like they're in the range between gold and copper to me. I've lined them up in an order I think they should go in, from cool to dark to light. But I'm also going to be mixing in some of this white metallic into them in the same way I'd mix white into paint when swatching, just to get a better sense of the differences for some of the ones that are a bit too similar when saturated. So what I can tell from swatching is that the amber and citrine are actually quite pale, which is quite unique and could be useful for an angelic scheme. The elven gold is what I'd consider the most gold-like. It's cool tone and vibrant, unlike its brother over here, which is darker but still cool. If elven is the cool, then dwarven is the warm, with Viking gold being its darker brother, but not as dark. And Victorian brass, well, it said on the label it was brass, but I didn't believe it. I do now, but that doesn't mean I can't find a place for it to fit into the color scheme that I'm going to do. Now that I got a bit of a handle on the golds, time to figure out how to slot them all, yes, all, into the model. I'm going to go about this a little differently than my usual. Instead of showing off one color in a section, I'm going to do one step with all the colors. This one is going to be the Basecoats, and I'll start with one of the cool golds first. The dark one, which is going to be the shade for the elven gold later. This is the one that should give me the most angelic look, so I think it's going to cover all the prominent spots, like the shoulders, chest, wrists, and helmet, the most backpacky part of the jetpack. For some of the smaller details, I think that's where we use the warmer golds, so starting with the Viking gold since it's a little darker as well. It should make for a nice base coat too, just on the buckles and small plates like these extra decorations on the boots. I've got to get the brass I picked out in here too, and I think that the pipes on the wings is a perfect place for it, since it'll mimic a brass organ best. The last two are the pale colors. Well, I want the wings to be the lightest of the golds, so I earmarked them for the citrine even before I got started with the others. But for the amber, I'm thinking its best place is to outline the tabards, something light like the white that'll be in the middle of them, but not too dark to be a really heavy contrast for them either. Some parts just have to be a normal steel, I feel, like the sword and the gun, so they get some dark steel. But while I paint it on, I'll share a pointer about metallics and wet palettes. There's something about metallics that makes them draw way more moisture through the membrane than normal paint pigments, which is why they start to get watery the longer they sit there. So only put a little on the wet palette at a time and refresh as needed, and don't expect to leave them for a night and come back to a workable paint the next day. The metals are still there, sure, but the binder's been replaced. So when it comes to all these metallics, shake well and always paint from a fresh pour. Now, it's perfectly feasible to pick one contrast color and just wash the whole dang thing with it. but I've picked 4 of my dipping inks that I think will look better more selectively added than just overall. I've heard contrast is great for metallics, and while I don't see why they wouldn't be, I thought it would be a good chance for me to check for myself. For the darkest color I have, I'm using the skeleton brown. It's a bit more of a warm brown and not too dark, so should go well with my warm gold. I want to use the darkest one on these bits because I really want it to line the insides of them, really give some good separation between the parts. I'll also put it on where the steel is just to save some time. For this dark orange, I picked it out because I figured it'd go well with the brass. But if I was going to mix these, I think this would be really good to warm up the yellows if I was finding them too cool. The papyrus dip is like a dark parchment yellow, and that's what I'm going to be wanting on all of my angelic armor. While I do have a brighter yellow dipping ink for the really bright ones, for the armor I wanted to make sure I got some contrast between dark and light. Lastly is the misted yellow. This is the lightest yellow available for these dipping inks, and I don't want to go too dark with my wings or trim, so that's why I picked this one out for them. It'll give me some of that golden yellow shade without losing brightness. The last process I like to do is clean up things with a relayering, taking the same colors I used for the base coats with a few exceptions, and just adding another layer with them so that they appear more even in the highlights. The first exception is the one I'm doing right now, which is the Dwarven Gold. It's a bit brighter than the base Viking Gold that I used. The other one is the Elven Gold, which is, as I mentioned during the swatches, the most gold looking of them all. So it's only fitting that this is what we see first and foremost when it comes to the bulk of the armor. Because there's so much texture on the wings, I really don't want to do a beginner style model by painstakingly painting each line onto each feather. So to save some time and hassle, I'm just going to dry brush the citrine back on. Metallics generally take pretty well to dry brushing, but take it easy. They're also really easy to rub off if you're pushing too hard. As I finish up just adding some of the base colors back on where there wasn't any exceptions, I want to talk about the brushes and metallics. The general consensus is that you don't want to use your good brushes with them, and I agree. This is one place a cheap synthetic is better. But if you only have one set of brushes, that kind of thinking isn't going to help much, is it? So here's a few things you can do to reduce the impact metallics have on your normal brushes. First is to never fill the brush. I'm not sure if it's been apparent as I've been painting this whole time, but I only ever have the paint in the tip of the brush. If it starts to creep up, I immediately wash it off. The other is to never let it dry in your brush. While it might be tedious, it's actually worthwhile to either add moisture or wash your brush before going back to the palette for more paint. Once those flakes permanently dry on the bristles, that's when we start to see problems. I wanted to do this color scheme for a few reasons. The first is it's just been a while since I've done a simple beginner level scheme, so thought one was due. But also because when the Blessed Sisters were designed, it was in the style of Baroque architecture, which was mainly gold. So I don't think it would have been fair to let them pass by without a gold scheme of some sort. Please subscribe if you like this video, and check the link in the description to my Discord where I talk all sorts of nonsense about miniatures painting, provide critique on paint jobs, and occasionally stream.